Go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. As with the Games, the Paralympics follow the Olympics. So the Paralympic panel is following the Olympic panel. And as with the Games, the attendance for the Paralympics tends to be lower than the Olympics. So this is a reflection of what happens at the Games, I suppose. But thank you very much for coming. My name is Jamie Shapiro. I'm an associate professor at the University of Denver. I'm also a contractor with the United States Olympic Committee, and I provide mental performance consulting for several Paralympic teams. I am the moderator today, but I am also a panelist because I did attend the Games. And unfortunately, Sarah Mitchell is unable to attend today for health reasons. She really apologizes for not being here. So I'm kind of representing the US team. There were 3 of us in Pyeongchang, myself, Artur Pashvardovsky, and Sarah Mitchell. And Sarah is a full-time at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. So she was kind of our lead coordinating our services. So there were 3 of us there, which is kind of amazing because in Sochi there were 0 sports psychology providers on the ground in Pyeongchang. In Sochi, and then in Pyeongchang there were 3 of us. And we really have the high performance director of Paralympics, Matt Kramer, to thank for that, for sending all 3 of us. So that was a really big difference. So I'm representing the team, myself, Artur, and Sarah. So I will try to speak for all of us, but also talk about my personal experience, as well as moderate this panel. So I'm thrilled. We scrambled before the Games to try to figure out what sports psychology providers would be attending the Paralympics. And through our contacts, kind of like, oh, I know this person's going, I know this person's going. So we're thrilled to have 4 countries represented here, and I know there were more providers there, and I apologize if who I left out, but this is who we were able to get together to submit an abstract in time for AASP. But I'm thrilled that we have South Korea, Germany, Australia, and the United States represented as providers at the Paralympics. So I'll first have the panelists introduce themselves as well as talk about their role at the Games.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name's Chris. I'm from Australia, and my role at the time was working at the Australian Institute of Sport, which is our national organisation to support Olympic and Paralympic athletes. And one of the groups that I was working with was the Australian Para-Winter team. As you can imagine, that's a pretty small team in Australia. We don't have a lot of snow. So Jamie's going to talk a little bit about the sports, but we only had 2 of the sports there. And so I was working with them approximately 1 day a week in my role there, and the rest of the time I'm working with summer Olympic and Paralympic athletes.
So good morning, everyone. Thanks for having you here. My name is Kristine. I'm from Germany, and at the Paralympic Games I was responsible for the wheelchair curling team. So I was the only sports psychologist for the whole German team. There was only this team having me on board. Apart from that, I work with different Olympic federations as a freelance sports psychologist, not exclusively in Paralympic sports, but also in, the normal Olympic sports. Most of the time, currently in fencing.
Hi, my name is Yongchul Chung. I'm a professor at Sogang University in Korea. I used to teach at the United States until 2010, came back there, and it's kind of ironic that I get involved in more elite because I wasn't interested in before I came back to Korea, but I have more chance to interact with many athletes after I get back to Korea. I got my CMPC like a few years ago finally, and then in consulting, and I both involved with the Olympics and Paralympics. For this Paralympics, I work with the para ice hockey as a sledge hockey team. We have 17 athletes. We have a total of 39 athletes in a Paralympic and Korean team. 17 is a huge number. And I was the only one, the Korean sports-like person at the village throughout the Olympic Games. So it was a pretty formidable task to working with all the 39 athletes at the Games.
Thank you. I do want to provide a little bit of context for the Games, for the Paralympic Games. So there are 6 sports at the Winter Paralympic Games. The Summer Paralympic Games are a little bit larger. So here are the 6 sports. Para-Alpine skiing, Nordic skiing consisted of biathlon and cross-country skiing, para-ice hockey, para-snowboard, and wheelchair curling. So you heard we worked with various teams. I personally work with the Alpine skiing and snowboard team. Artur worked with those two teams. We co-consulted with them, and he also worked with Nordic, and Sarah was also overseeing those three teams, although worked most closely with the Alpine team. So for the United States, there was no one to my knowledge working with wheelchair curling or para ice hockey, the sled hockey. So that's just to let you know about the sports. That's the total number of athletes from 49 delegations. The United States sent about 70 athletes total. So we talked a little bit about our roles with the team. It's interesting to hear, I think Jan and I both work at university full-time and do this part-time. Christian is in private practice. Chris was with the Australian Institute of Sport. So a lot of different roles going on here. But I'd like everyone to talk about the nature of their work leading up to the games as well as during the games. And I've included pictures here so you get an idea of our experience. If there's any athletes, there's not many, but if there are, we have permission to use them or they're a public image. So the nature of your work leading up to and during the games.
Okay, so I worked with Para-Alpine and Snowboarding, and they were the only two teams, as mentioned. We have 15 athletes, including their sighted guides. And I'd been working with the team for approximately 3 years into the lead up. So for most of the Paralympic cycle, I was with this group. Largely, I don't travel with the team, so I'm across the other side of the world in a very different time zone. So most of the work that I'm doing with these guys is via Skype, and it's usually a little bit after events have happened, which can be challenging. So certainly the first year of my work with them was just relationship building, really, and trying to work out what on earth alpine skiing and snowboarding are, because I had no idea. So learning about the sport, learning about the coaches, and it was largely individual work, and that went into some team dynamics. So a number of our both the groups had been unstable in the past. Australia has some success at past Paralympics in winter sport, but we'd have a couple of rocky years, and Sochi in particular was quite a difficult games for a number of athletes. So there was work with the group. They had changing coaches in each of the years that I worked with them, so working on those team dynamics as well as doing individual consults with the athletes. One of the things that our Paralympic Committee, so the Australian Paralympic Committee is the group that runs the team during games time, and they're incredibly supportive of psychology. So one of the things that I did with both staff and athletes, and this is all the staff from the chef de mission to the coaches, to the administrators, to the medical staff, we did a mental health screening with everyone. So I asked them to complete a mental health screening before they went, and if there were any risk factors, then I followed up with that. And if there was anything that needed to be shared more broadly, usually with a doctor, then I would ask for permission to do that. So that was one of the roles. And then the other broader role that, again, the Paralympic Committee was great about including psychology in was to do the critical incident management planning. So we did that with our federal police and our chef de mission and a whole big group of people, but they were quite keen to explore the psychological dimensions of that and to make sure that that was included. So there were kind of performance domains and the more normal things, and then there were these other areas that I had less experience in, but that were important. And so it's looking at what might happen at the games, both from a fairly, a significant injury that takes people out, a car crash on icy roads. Not many Aussies drive on icy roads, so driving was a bit of an issue for us, things like that. But it was great to be involved in that planning as well. So
generally, my voyage with the team started in 2014. So I started to work with them there, and maybe when you look at the picture, you see me just sitting there with them, the guy with this red sweater on, and in the back you see an older guy, and this is actually the head coach. And I mention this because this guy was really naturally like old-fashioned in the way he was leading the team. More or less, he was saying to them, "Come on, get out and play. This is all I have to say." And the other thing, what was essential about him, he was really less structured. There was no structure at all. So when I started working with them, one thing I introduced was a bit of structure. And I mean this really on a basic level, incorporating, for example, a kind of team room and a kind of structure, how we get towards the competition and all that stuff. So this was a big, I got some of additional service apart from what I normally do in doing performance-related issues. I was kind of a manager, I don't know how to call it, a lot of things. And then the year before the Olympics, this changed, because you see this young lady in the picture, on the here at the very end. Actually, this was his daughter, and he was working on the highest level in curling, and she was really structured, and so she this changes the whole style of working for preparing the team in the Olympic season, because she did a great job and giving structure to them, and this changed my role as well. So in the Olympic year, right before the Paralympic, a lot of things were about just to figure out who is doing what, because when the team is getting bigger, you have to make clear that everybody has has understandable responsibilities and functions. So we set this up. And another thing, what we worked on a lot before the games was how to deal, of course, with the specific circumstances around the games. Pressure was an issue, and one thing we figured, they just choke under pressure as more as they get isolated. So thing was a little bit, we figured when they isolate themselves on the ice, this is a sign that it's getting down in her performance, and we figured out some issues to stay connected to each other. But I will talk more about this in a second when I talk more about the work during the games.
Okay, I have many roles there. First of all, the para ice hockey team I met about a year ago, prior up to the Paralympic. It was February of 2017 when the NGO, like one of the personnel, approached me and if I can work with them. It was pretty challenging because they're stationed in about like 2 hours away from Seoul, and I have to drive. And they asked me to come like every week and spending time with my team. And at that time, it was kind of impossible for me to do in that schedule. So I have to kind of negotiate a little bit. So when I first come to the team, I wasn't sure whether I'm going to work with them or not. I went there just see if it will work or not. And it was kind of the big room meeting, whole team. And then just something happened. Like in the first day, it was like, in the first love kind of thing. Like you get to know them right away, and I kind of liked them, and they kind of liked me. So it was like right after the session, I talked to the manager that I'm with this team. So it was kind of started up like accidentally, and then it bothers me more and more prior up to the Olympic Games, and it intensifies as the game goes on. During the Paralympic Games, it was much more work to do, because like to me, it was like once a week deal, but now it becomes like 24-hour thing. You kind of stay there with them all the time. What I usually do was like just cruise around and just say hi. And the head coach was really good. He asked assistant coach to come up with the names of people who wants to talk with me. So they kind of like sign up for me to have a consultation. I usually have like 3 or 4 athlete a day or so. We kind of like line up and we do. So that was kind of a real cool thing. I was get around, and we have like 17 people, like I said before. So I can't get to everyone. They ended up like talking to each other. They call it like, we find the way to do the mental thing for ourselves. So there's like 2 athletes talking to each other, and I was just kind of sitting there like, yeah, you can do your own thing. So basically, I was kind of there, and the good thing that happened with me, because the first session was really good, and I was asking them what will be their goal to for the Olympic game. They say bronze medal. and we have a little silence because that's really cool to have bronze, but it wasn't very cool because it's Pyeongchang and they won gold medal. And it's like Canada and US is one of the two biggest country, and we need 2 miracles to get a gold medal. But during the session, one athlete, the younger one, says like, I wanna compete at the final day. And another silence, and everybody just imagine that that's gonna happen. And then their face is kind of like different look. And that was kind of first moment they kind of lighten up they're in their mind that they can shoot for a gold medal. So throughout the whole season, we were talking about gold medal all the time. We ended up getting a bronze, but we were happy that we can dreaming about the gold medal throughout the season. I think that was kind of key for me to be successful there, because like I can throw out. It wasn't my idea; it was their idea to think about their final day, and that kind of helped them to keep on going throughout the whole year of very tough times.
Great, and I'll talk about the U.S. work leading up to the games. So our tour and I were called right after Sochi. The U.S. Paralympic High Performance Director recognized a need for sports psychology services and mental training. There were some fairly traumatic, large crashes at Sochi, and they just recognized the need to provide more services. So in 2014, we had coffee with the High Performance Director, and he said, and I think I've Peter, who's in the audience, probably to thank for sending him our way, because we're down the road in Denver. And he said, let's see what happens. And so our tour and I worked with some teams, and then Sarah Mitchell was hired about a year later, which was really helpful. She's full-time, she could coordinate our services. She also provides referrals, and she's a clinical psychologist. I think what's important to know is our tour and I are mental performance consultants, and our role with the teams is really mental performance. So we do have counseling training as well. Of course, you can't always separate it, but Sarah really coordinates the clinical care of the athletes, and I think that's essential that we have that resource now, and we're a collaborative team. We consult with each other on cases, et cetera. So for 4 years, we worked on mental performance. We did group sessions, individual sessions, but we would see them occasionally. We would see them at training camps or races. And a lot of Skype in between, like Chris as well. So a lot of distance consulting, which provides its own challenges. So then at the games, it was my first games experience. I had done a Pan Am Games for summer sports as well, but it was my first winter games. And there, we were around a lot, like they were, and it was a challenge to coordinate 2 or 3 teams that we worked with, but we were able to stay in the village. I think it'd be interesting, because I think Chris did not stay in the village, to see the difference between staying in the village and not. But we stayed in the village, and so we would do individual sessions as needed in the village, and then really be on the hill and do consulting on the hill. So a lot of check-ins. You know, talk about your plan before, and then afterwards we were in the finish line, and they would process with us. And one of the highlights that, we'll get to highlights later, but I'm jumping ahead, was really that they knew how to use us by the time we got to Pyeongchang, which was cool to pay off, because I think the first year, like someone mentioned, was really a relationship building year. The athletes were kind of checking it out. How's this gonna be? The coaches were checking it out and trying to figure out how to integrate us. And so we were finally, I think it paid off at the games, that they knew to contact us, and they knew how to use us on the hill. They weren't kind of shying away or afraid to talk to us. So we're gonna move on now to highlights and challenges. I already said mine. So I'll have everyone talk about 1 or 2 highlights and 1 or 2 challenges that they faced at the games.
Okay. I'll just quickly address the location issue. I was living outside the village, so we didn't have enough accreditation, and so I wasn't accredited to be in the village. The Paralympic Committee were very good about getting me as much accreditation as they could. So that meant I was allowed to be in the village almost 24 hours, but I needed to sleep somewhere, and they got me a delightful hotel. And the other difficulty, for those of you who don't know, if you don't have the full athlete coach staff accreditation, which I didn't, I was a guest, you can't get on the transport, so I couldn't get on the buses that the athletes and coaches got to get to venues. And this can be a real issue, particularly in places like Pyeongchang and trying to get to the mountain venues to see the athletes. So what our organisation had done that was very helpful was I was quite a highly ranked guest. So they took the APC, so our presidents gets 2 guest passes, they only took 1, and I got the other one, which meant I could commandeer a car whenever I needed a car, which was really useful. So I actually ended up traveling in style throughout the Paralympics. I didn't need to get on the buses. I could get a car 24 hours a day. That was a problem prior to the start of competition because not many guests go to watch training events. And so they didn't know where they were going when they were driving me around. I had to wait a bit because they're like, why on earth do you want to go to a competition venue when there's no competition? So that was a little bit difficult, but it worked out fine. And there were a couple of occasions where it was really quite useful because I could take an athlete with me in a car as well. So we had a few dramas and athletes needed to leave the venue quickly, and then I could get a car for those athletes, which was quite useful. So that was the good side. The other good side, I quite like sleeping in my hotel room, to be honest. It was very comfortable. I got a room to myself, which is a luxury in these sorts of places. You're mostly sharing with other people. So that was really quite nice, but you are a little bit disconnected, okay, and you can feel a little bit more disconnected because you're not around as much, and if there's long days, there are a couple of weather days that weren't great, and so rather than train, the athletes stayed in the village, and we were just hanging out in the village, and our accommodation is quite small because we're a small team, so you're kind of in this fairly confined space with nowhere really to go to switch off. If I wanted to switch off, you need to be available a bit more often, so I just, made lots of coffees and had a chat with people and had to deal with that. So that was perhaps a small challenge. But there are definitely pros and cons to being in the village or out of the village. So maybe I'll just mention, I guess kind of similar to Jamie, one of the other highlights for me in particular was just the ability to be there. I didn't usually travel with them, and that ability gives you, the fact that you are there gives you the ability to intervene in a timely manner, and then it's just more useful, So there were times the athletes would come to me at the bottom of the hill, so I had to sneak in to the tent at the bottom of the hill. I wasn't actually allowed in there, and I did get kicked out once. But mostly, if you're wearing a tracksuit and you have some kind of accreditation, they'll let you in. But a couple of the athletes, they had their moments and they weren't quite where they wanted to be, and so they'd just stick their head in, we'd have a quick chat, they'd get the gondola up and they'd be away again. And that's just not possible if you're not there and you don't have the accreditation. And the ability to celebrate with them. Some of the athletes had worked long and hard on various things, to get to be where they wanted to be. For some of them, their families had never seen them compete, and one of the athletes had competed in 3 Paralympics, and their family had never seen them compete anywhere in the world, let alone at a Paralympics. And one of their team members actually paid for the parents to go. So to see that family with that athlete after their competition was particularly special, and that was really good. And the other one I just want to mention, because I think it's a nice one for the Paralympics. I don't know how many of these guys do it, but some of our athletes are visually impaired, and Samsung sponsored the games, and so they had some of their technology there, which was kind of fun to play around with. There was this virtual reality ride that was really cool if you were bored in the village. But one of the things they had were these goggles that you could put on your phone, and they helped you see distances. And so some of these visually impaired athletes, for those who aren't familiar with VI, they would use these goggles and they could see across the room for the first time, probably in their life or in a really long time. And so I was with some of the athletes when they had that experience, and it was amazing. It was amazing to see them go, wow, I can see this, I can read this, I can interact with the world in a very different way. So that was just a really special moment, kind of off the snow. I think I've used up enough time, so I might not address challenges, but there were some. Feel free to grab me afterwards if you want to hear about my challenges.
So I'm getting to the highlights shortly, but firstly, I want to mention, before I said we figured in the preparation that they crack, the probability that they crack under pressure rises if they isolate on the ice. So during the preparation, we invented a little analogy. We call it the meerkat principle. Maybe you know meerkats. And maybe you've ever seen meerkats competing against bigger animals. They never do it alone. So if they compete against a rattlesnake, they're every time fighting in groups. And we highlighted this meerkat principle over and over again. So, for example, in our dressing room, there were pictures of them. And for me personally, of course, I like when a plan is being processed as it was intended. So when I saw them on the ice, and here you see them on the ice during the first game, and they coming together continuously every time, regardless if they shoot good or bad, this was really, I was thinking, oh yeah, well, come on, it's working, they remember this. So this was one personal highlight, and seeing them really sticking to that really basic principle. And of course, maybe you should know that this team, they had a really bad history with the ice in Pyeongchang, because normally in wheelchair it's like that the World Championship right before the Paralympics is at the same spot. So they have been to Pyeongchang. The problem was they lost every game. And they not only lose it, they lose it badly, by far. And of course, you can anticipate coming back to the stage when you lost so badly, and then the Paralympics are on. Oh my God! So all the group, they were like, oh, the first game was happening, and of course we did a lot of work in letting them know that being nervous, for example, will be pretty normal, because it's the Paralympics, of course, there are this bad history, but it's just normal being more excited, and we just stick to our principles, get together close. For example, what we did in addition was, in the dressing room, for example, we put up little fold cards, and on these fold cards, all the some friends of them, they just cheered with them. So they write them notes from home that they believed in them. Everything was just designed to the point that they see they're just not alone. But sometimes they might feel that they're alone, but that they see in reality they are not. So this picture you see in the middle, this is after the first game, and of course it was one highlight because we won the first game. Yeah? So it was quite a surprise, because the other team, they rated way better than us. So we had 12 teams on the competition, and curling is a sport where everything can be narrowed down to statistics. So at the end, you can see who is performing in terms of shooting percentage. And if you look at the shooting percentages from the other teams, they were, even the worst team were like 15 percentage points above us. So we were by far, when it comes down to the curling ability, we were by far way down. So that we make it was, of course, a team effort, and I really remember this first moment. And then it continues that we really get on a kind of specific wave, because we didn't only win the first game, we won the second one, the third one, even the fourth one. And then a challenge came up, because maybe you remember that the Germans, they won surprisingly a silver medal in ice hockey. So in hockey at the in Pyeongchang. And the problem was that we were the only team within the German team. There was only one team, not just us. And then we got messages all over telling us, oh, you are our second hockey team again, and so on. And then the expectation rise, and of course, then it moves quickly that it gets another issue again, that they were seeing a little bit, oh, the medal is coming up. Maybe we gonna have a chance. Maybe we will make it. So yeah, it was quite tough dealing with it and taking them back to the moment where they are, taking them back to the point that we are above expectations. Yeah, but this was a story, and it continued almost till the end of the games. Yeah.
For me, this Pyeongchang Olympic is very special because we are the hosting country. And I think one of the highlights for me was kind of getting together with the group from the other place. And we came as like individual, as a mental coach, but we get together in the village and we're talking about their teams. And it was kind of like camaraderie, and we get together friendship. That's just another thing. There's a picture there. We have a bulgogi, the Korean barbecue with Jamie and Arthur. There was kind of like one of the big moments for me. And having said that, I mean, we compete each other. Like, you know, for the athlete, they're fighting. It's almost like war. But in the behind scene, we all get together. We kind of share the knowledge, and it was kind of like nice for me. It was one of the highlights for me. And also, actually, it's probably because of the Paralympic culture. It's unlike Olympic. It's more like friendship. I'm not sure that's true, but like my team compete with U.S. para ice hockey team. They fiercely fight, but after the game, they get together. They're like buddies. They're like brothers. They grow up together. They know each other for like 15 years, 20 years. So they know their sons and daughters, talking about their parents. So it was like a whole family kind of deal. So it was kind of like a very touching moment for me to kind of realize we are here to compete, but we also in the same family kind of deal. To me, for the Korean athlete, it was pretty much because of the hosting thing. We have a lot of media attention we never get before. Like, you know, in general, Korean people didn't even know they're like existing, but now they're the president coming to our game. The first lady was there, and the first lady come down to our locker room, and it was like big media hoopla. So like we never experienced those kind of like big attention. There's kind of catch-22 because like sometimes it's good to boost your confidence or whatever, but sometimes it kind of burdens you. There's a lot of pressure coming up. So there was like, you know, it happens. We have to kind of figure it out how to handle those unexpected, you know, the pressure that we have to handle. The most challenging part for me was because me as the person looking overseas, like not just one team, but there's other needs. Like biathlon athlete didn't get a gold medal, which was expected the first day, and then the president of biathlon, you know, association called me up, like, Yang, can you meet this athlete because he's probably broke or something, you know. It's just kind of like a last minute pull out. And also wheelchair curling, I have a special lecture before the game, and they have like the same day, the bronze medal game was the same day with my para ice hockey team. We won the bronze medal. Our wheelchair curling got fourth, and we have celebration on that day and night at the Korean house. And there's a bunch of like ice hockey guys and, you know, cheering up and, you know, happy. There's like 5 curling people just like, you know, just putting down their head. It was kind of heartbreaking to see like in those things. I was more interested in working with wheelchair curling that night, and actually I pulled them up in the backside and talking about what happened. And I ended up actually working with the wheelchair curling national team at this point as a result. But just see and have to kind of oversee too many people at the same time. And one of my athletes was a visually impaired skier. Her last event was on the day we have a ceremony for the bronze event. So I have to go to Cheongsan, which is like an hour driving from the village, and I cannot be at the para ice hockey team bronze medal receiving ceremony. So it was kind of catch-22 things, like you have to be 2 places at one time. That was the most challenging for me as well.
So I mentioned one of the highlights being that the athletes actually knew how to use us, which was quite nice by that time. As you can probably tell, you know, the Paralympics, at least in the U.S. in terms of mental training services or sports psychology services, is quite behind the Olympics, and there's only one full-time sports psychologist for Paralympics in the U.S. That's Sarah Mitchell, whereas you see there's many more full-time sports psychologists for the Olympics. So this is very much developing, and Sarah wanted to make sure I shared. Her highlight was really being the lead of this team of her, Artur, and myself, and coordinating our services and collaborating. And, we mentor each other, we consult with each other. I think my experience was very positive because there were 3 of us there. When I was at the Pan Am Games in Toronto, I was the only person, and it was a vast difference having 2 other people that you can process things with, that you could consult with. I mean, Sarah, as a clinical psychologist, was really there to handle the crises, and there were a couple that she had to deal with, but that allowed Artur and I to do our work as mental performance consultants and focus on the role that we were there to do. If there's only one person there, like these other countries, you're everything to everyone, and that could be quite challenging. So I saw a very big difference in my 2 games experiences. I think the Toronto experience prepared me quite well for this. So having that team, and there's the picture of us, I'll go back. On the left, Artur, Sarah, and I was a huge highlight, and Sarah wanted me to share that as well, and I'm sure Artur would say the same thing also. And of course, the bulgogi in the middle there. For my first time having Korean barbecue in Korea, so that was pretty exciting. And now I can't wait to go in Denver as well. But a challenge for me is definitely managing my energy level. We were there for a few weeks. You're away from home. Chris said she had a nice hotel room. The village sounds really cool. It's like a dorm, and you're an adult, and you're used to your own space and your own things. Luckily, I did have my own room in a suite. So I shared a suite, shared a bathroom, but I had my own room. And I think that made a huge difference for me to be able to do my job at my best. To have that space to go rest, to call my family, to process, taking notes, I kept a journal, things like that. So unfortunately, that's a bit out of our control, and I found out afterwards that the US was given a few extra floors, and that was the only reason we were able to do that. In Toronto, I shared a room in the suite, and that was challenging for me. So as an adult, I know a lot of my students, it's their dream job to go to the Olympics and the Paralympics and stay in the village, and how cool that is. But physically and mentally as an adult, it's hard. So I will put that out there for everybody. But I felt like I managed my energy much better this time. I exercised, we took breaks. I didn't feel guilty about taking breaks. I think throughout the 4 years, that's something that I really learned was, you're on from 6, 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. You're eating meals. When the coaches have a break, that's when we're meeting with athletes individually, so we don't get that break. And I would be gone a weekend and then come back to the university to teach, and I struggled for a couple of years there in managing my energy. So I was really pleased with the amount of sleep I got, actually, probably because I had my own room, and how I managed my energy. So it was a challenge, but also a highlight, because I felt like I grew a lot in the past few years in being able to manage my energy. So that was one of my lessons learned, was how to manage the energy, to not feel guilty about taking breaks, because that's going to allow me to better serve our athletes. But I'll have everyone talk about some lessons learned and recommendations for those who might attend either a Paralympic Games or another Games.
Okay, so I guess one of the things that I learned is also related to a challenge that I hadn't talked about, but there was quite a lack of psychological safety in our group based on their previous kind of experiences and the team dynamics. And while that had progressed a little bit, there was huge avoidance of conflict within this group. They just did not want to talk about things or to address things head on. And it's very difficult to do that when you're not there, because mostly when I'm not traveling with the people, I'm hearing stories. I'll get a story from an athlete, a slightly different story from a coach, a slightly different story from another athlete. So I had tried to address this a little bit when I saw people face-to-face off the snow back in Australia, and it just didn't get very far. It didn't get shifted much. So I guess, in hindsight, putting more energy into that would have been quite useful. And so the lesson around that, part of it is do stuff a bit earlier, but part of it is you do often just contain, you hold people's emotions for them, and you really need to be very good at that, to not only manage your own emotions, to be prepared to not necessarily intervene, but just to hold the frustrations, to hold the fear. A lot of these sports are fear-based sports, to sit with the athletes with that and be comfortable enough just to do that. And that's often enough, you know, and that if you haven't done it beforehand, intervening can be tricky during the games. So get really comfortable with just being the person who's holding a lot of people's emotions, which means then you need some support. So that is the challenge when you're an individual provider. And I had lined up friends back home. Thankfully for this experience, like Australian time difference wasn't too bad. So I could speak to people back in Australia. These guys were great. It was nice to have people in the village that I'm sure if there was anything in particular I wanted to reach out about, they would have, you know, made themselves available if at all possible. So, you know, be ready for that, learn about that, be really good at managing your own emotions and the ability to hold other people's.
Well, one lesson learned was a bit, for a couple of years I'm thinking back and forth about the question, for what reason, or what's the biggest pressure? Is it more pressure worrying about you mess it up? And for quite a long time I thought, yeah, this is all about, because all the athletes are telling me, oh, Christian, I'm fear that I mess it up on this specific event, and especially on the Olympics. So I thought, yeah, this is it when it comes to performance pressure. But at the Paralympics, I figured, no, there's another thing, way more pressure, that you can win something. So, and I figured, when it's the first time, really the first time for a team, and they're anticipating, now they are gonna be, there's a chance that they can get to the big stage, and there's a chance that they can get to the medal ceremony. Oh my God, this is gonna be way more pressure. And this, ended up for them a little bit like that the roller coaster ride was, we won the first four games, and afterwards we lost the other 5 games in a row. And the reason why I put this picture up was, it was a good lesson learned to be a bit more self-reflective. What are you doing under pressure? So what are your automatic habits? Do you do more? Do you do less? Do you have the feeling, oh my God, I have to hold it together a little bit? And to evaluate it with a little bit more time in between, I would say it's just a good recommendation putting the brakes on and just doing less. And oftentimes just doing the opposite, what you might think in the first place is right. And these can be really little things. For example, when the preparation is on and this is just your time, and you think, oh yeah, now I should mention 3 things. My advice would be mention only 2, or maybe mention only 1. This is just enough. And the other thing is, I think you have to consider that like my team, based on my team, they were still in a learning phase. And of course we had to consider this, even if we didn't like that we weren't as prepared as we would like to. And at the very end, it's essential giving them really, really simple advice. So a lot of people have talked about like mindfulness, and sometimes you might think, now we're going through mindful meditation and we do all these things, 5 senses, and turning on the senses individually. No, way too complicated. It's more about like remind them in an informal place, okay, where are we now? Okay, come on, look around. Remember yourself. You're here at the Paralympics. This is just part of your dream. This is part of every athlete's dream, and now we are here. So the simple things, and coming back to the simple things, I would say is pretty essential, especially during the games.
All right, I was waiting to my turn and kind of jotting down stuff that I'm going to talk about, and I have like 5 in a row, so just adding up. First of all, it's not just about the athlete, but it's the whole staff members. Like sometimes the staff members are very important. I was hooked up with the head coach very well, and actually equipment manager was the like core person. So he knows everyone. So I kind of get to know equipment person. He was like my roommate. So we get to know each other, and that kind of instantly gave me some power to connect with anybody. So there was I didn't expect that way, but that happened that way. And I think the key role they play is in the game. You have to work with their coaches as well. The second, I think we mentioned it earlier, not guilty about helping, not guilty about not helping all of them. Sometimes, like, inaction can be very powerful. To me, just going there with them and not doing it all, just be present with them, that helps me a lot. And you don't have to do extra step to do it, just to be there and be calm and kind of smiling and nod, that kind of like mode. And people just feel much safer, just be with me. And the third one was I still struggle with that closure. Like, we have a long journey, like, pick up the experience. We cried all, like, in the bronze game. We have like national anthem singing, crying, like, and it was like a big thing. And then all of a sudden, I never see them again. It was the last time. Like, so it was like you lost your best friend all of a sudden. Like, we have 17 guys there. We were kind of very close, and it's done. So sometimes you have to get back, and it's just, I don't know how to do it. I mean, it's kind of still struggling, how to not seeing them on a regular basis. So I think we have to kind of struggle all the time with that. The cultural thing, like in different sport, a different culture, like I work with the ice hockey and the curling, two different sports. The curling are very quiet and very stubborn sometimes, and ice hockey are like, they're like kind of macho and things. A very different culture. You have to kind of dance with different cultures all the time. That's another key things. Finally, being in perspective, the moment that I felt most touching was that after the bronze medal game, we kind of like shake hands with the opponent team. It was Italy. There's the old guy in the Italy team come back to me, and we shake hands. He was crying, and I was like, we were happy with winning. We were crying because we were happy, but there's another opponent. There's crying because they want that bronze medal as much as we want. So it's kind of like being in the other side of shoes, and I felt like, maybe we can, yeah, I mean, there's a different perspective in one side, and it was very learning experience for me to see all on different side at the same time. All right.
Thank you. So one highlight I didn't mention for the U.S. is we won the medal count, which I kind of forget sometimes. I didn't even write that in my notes, but I remembered we won the medal count for Paralympics, and it was a surprise to a lot of people. And when I processed the games afterwards with the high performance director and Sarah and our tour, he said everyone's thrilled with the performance, obviously winning the medal count, but it shouldn't be a surprise that we put the processes in place to make this happen. So let's stop treating it as a surprise. Of course, celebrate it. There's a lot of work to still be done, but don't treat it as a surprise. So that was an interesting lesson to learn. Something I also struggled with was the emotional piece of the highs and lows for myself too, and wondering, should I be showing this so much emotion as a mental performance consultant? We're kind of taught to be in the background, and where there's the objective person. And yeah, I got really excited when someone killed it, and when someone got a medal, when they have been to 3 games and haven't medaled, and they finally got their medal, and it was emotional, and it was emotional for me. And that managing emotions piece was something I was like, am I showing too much emotion? Am I not? And it's just a lesson that I'm trying to reflect on and monitor a little bit. Also, when someone was disappointed, that was tough for me. Someone I had been working with for 3 or 4 years who had high expectations and didn't even finish most of their races. And I struggle with what to say, and when I look back, I don't think I said the right thing. I typically go to reframing. That's one of my key tools, and I'm very CBT. And that person wasn't ready for a reframe at that point. They just wanted me to be there with them, and maybe just feel that defeat with them a little bit instead of, you know, it's okay and there's more to life than the Paralympics. Like, no, they weren't there yet. I wanted to address the follow-up thing because we've talked about the post-games blues. I've heard that in presentations before, and trying to prepare athletes for the after, that we focus so much on the preparation and during, and there's not much after. So that was something we tried to do. We actually sent out an online survey to our athletes to you know, talk about strengths and critiques of the whole system, of their coaches, of the mental performance team, of the physio team, et cetera. And of course, not everyone answers an online survey, but we got some great feedback, and we actually got a ton of feedback about Sports Psych, that they want more and they want us to travel more with them, because we really don't travel with them a whole lot unless they're in Colorado. So that was nice to have that contact with them and hear some of their critiques. And I think now I'm still working with the team, and so it's been nice to have some of that follow-up with them, and we were able at a following training camp to process, you know, you had this high of the games, what's it like now? How are you coping with that? And I think those were productive sessions. However, the people who were tired or didn't come back to the team, we never had a chance for that, and that does feel a little odd to me that we didn't have that consolidation or termination session, and even when we reached out, we don't get a response, and we have no idea what they're doing with their lives and things like that. So I encourage you to think about the after part of it as well. That would be a recommendation. And of course, a recommendation that you've heard over and over is have support, whether that's your own personal support, your colleagues. If you have no colleagues present, make sure you have people you could reach out to for consultation or support. And it was wonderful to be able to meet up. You know, this little AASP presentation that we threw together a couple weeks before the games, and then we all had coffee together and were able to meet at the games. And that's the last picture here is at least 4 of us got to get together, and so we took a picture. And I don't know if that's correct in Korean, Jan. You'll have to, I found it on
that's
Google.
Correct.
Okay. So thank you, but we have some time for questions, about 7 minutes for questions, so we'd love to take some of your questions. I think you have to go up to the mic. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your insight. It was very rich. In the previous panel, Karen McNeil mentioned how it was important to build the high performance culture prior to the games. In my own experience working with Paralympic athletes, it's sometimes a little bit more difficult to create that high performance culture. I was wondering, what was your vision on that, or your opinion on that, and how did you create that high performance culture?
Well, I have an experience with the team. The coach was a non-disabled athlete. He was a hockey player. The head coach had his elite mind, and he always complained about not tough enough for the athlete. And he blaming about in the Paralympic kind of culture, So you have to kind of go in between, and try kind of cool down the coach a little and kind of boost up the athlete. And I see what you're saying, there's some gap between Olympic and Paralympics, and I see that gaps in our team as well.
So maybe a little comment on that. I'm a little bit afraid if I get it right in English, but okay. First thing, I would say, for my team, it was not about high performance culture, it's performance culture. So this is the basic fact. So I think it's essential a little bit lowering your own expectations. So maybe it's about basic stuff. So I give you one example, what we did in preparation. So we made a kind of slogan, and the slogan was, "Every day counts towards the Paralympics." And we distributed a kind of calendar where they could just note just every activity which was related towards the Paralympics. And we are not only talking about doing something practice, we are talking about, okay, here I had a moment, I just thought about the games and so on. So I would think, especially in Paralympic sports, it's essential to review what are the realistic conditions where the athletes practice, for example. So we had some athletes, they weren't even able practicing regularly on ice. So you just have to consider, and we had some, they just work full time, and in addition they do sports. So you just have to consider what are the realistic conditions, and then adapt your service towards that.
Yeah, I agree that we haven't talked a lot about the Paralympic culture, but Paralympic athletes don't get paid as much as Olympic athletes. A lot of them are older. If you look at the age, there's older athletes in Paralympics. A lot of them have families, full-time jobs, and so the reality of them being a full-time athlete, we actually called it a 24/7 athlete, as that was what we were striving for, and then we adjusted the numbers. I don't remember what to, like 12/5 or something, but it's not realistic for some of them. And we do have a lot of coaches that come over from the able-bodied side, and they work with Paralympians, and they get frustrated at all of this. So we actually hired someone who coordinated the performance services, the strength and conditioning, physio, and our services as well, and that has changed the culture. Unfortunately, he just told us he's leaving, so I worry for the culture of that team again. But he coordinated all that to make it a lot higher of a performance, integrated us much more into the system. He calls it mental performance, by the way, so I know there was a lot of resistance to the CMPC and mental performance term, and we call it mental performance, we don't call it sports psychology, and the athletes have really taken to that and view it as an essential part of their training. So it takes time. It might take hiring someone, putting money into it, but also adjusting expectations, like the rest of them said.
And maybe just to note that some of them are. We have full-time athletes in the Australian team. They travel, they're not different to the Olympic athletes that I work with. We have a much bigger gap. So our elite guys are on par with the Olympic level athletes I work with. Our developmental guys, I mean, one of our guys, it was his first season competing internationally, and he's at the Paralympics, and you're never going to get that well, it's very rare to get that in Olympic sport. So that exposure and experience in high performance competition isn't there, even just in the event isn't there. So you can get much quicker trajectories in Paralympic sport, which is different, but we did have a number of multiple Paralympic athletes in our team, and if you said, they would be highly offended if they were thought to be any less capable or elite than Olympic athletes.
Yes, I've been asked by Paralympic athletes, what is the difference between working with Olympic athletes and us? And I wonder what's behind that question, because I think what they want to hear, and I think what's mostly true, is you're an elite athlete. There's not much different in terms of the mental side of performance. We're doing a lot of the same things. Yes, we have to adapt. When I'm working with a visually impaired athlete, I can't exactly have slides and expect them to know what's on the slides with pictures. So you have to be creative and you have to adapt, but overall the needs are very similar. And I agree, there's a wide variety there's the elite level who are doing this full time, and there are some who started their sport the year before the Paralympics and they're there.
I'm wondering if any of the panelists worked with athletes who had their own CMPC prior to going to the Olympics, and if so, if there's any coordination of services, and if not, if you think going forward, since AASP is so heavily promoting the work we do in the future, if athletes may have their own CMPC back home, wherever that is, and then go to the Olympics, what would that look like?
We do have that. So the athletes train all over the country and they come together for training camps. And so some of them do have their own CMPC or mental performance consultant or sports psychologist of their own. And then at training camps, they work with us. So I'm really careful to ask them what they're working on with their own person and reinforcing that. I don't want to step on toes. I don't want to offer anything contradictory. So it's more about reinforcing what's helpful from their other person. If they do want, I give them the option also if they want us to coordinate. So giving a release for us to chat with the other provider to ask about what they're working on.
I have it's not in Paralympic context, but I have an athlete who had a previous experience with the other CMPC. He came back to me, and to me, his experience wasn't very good. And it was almost a barrier for me to kind of go over. So that was kind of bad case. For the Paralympic, we have a curling team had like their own CMPC, and unfortunately he didn't get a AD to the village, so he kind of like contacted me to come up with going with their team. So I didn't have much conflict between him because we were a good friend, but sometimes you have to kind of like, worry about stepping on somebody else's toes.
Jamie, oh sorry. I think this kind of goes back to what you mentioned earlier about the, working with the visually impaired athlete. I was wondering if you could speak more about some of those challenges in terms of implementing those skills. What was your preparation around kind of navigating around those type of obstacles?
That's a great question. So with Paralympic sport, there are different classifications for different disabilities, and different sports have different classifications. So I could be at a training camp doing a group session to a room with people who are visually impaired, people who are intellectually impaired, people in wheelchairs, amputees. So to try to come up with an activity that everyone could do could be really challenging. To be honest, I learned a lot on the job. In graduate school, I didn't have a practicum with athletes with disabilities. Luckily, I had some colleagues who had, and we've done a lot of reading and consulting and observing and a lot of learning on the spot when I say things like, okay, now write down this, and then I realize some people in the room can't write. So I'll say, if you're able, or if you need assistance, or if you need to use your phone, that's fine. So I'll have to be really adaptable. But they help each other out. They help each other out, and the staff helps them out. And there's some people are born with their disabilities. They're congenital. Some of them are acquired. So they're at various stages too of being able to know their ability level. So some of them, they've been they've had their disability their whole life. They know how to adapt to it. So a lot of it is learning on the spot, but being really creative and recognizing, okay, not everyone's going to be able to do this. How can we still make it work?
Maybe add a short comment on that. Maybe the most effective intervention we did during the games was organizing the dressing room. So imagine wheelchair people, they just need space every time where they roll. So for us it was essential just organizing the dressing room in a way that everybody has its own space, and that it was easy that the person was able finding those things. Because we figured if we don't do this, there's a lot of potential for emotional distraction, and they get mad at on each other. This was my space, and so on and so on. And one thing every time, especially with wheelchair people, toilet is an issue. Toilet is every time an issue. So we literally made a schedule. Who is going when? And so on. This was just fixed. So, sometimes it's just learning on the job. But I think this was. I would never do this. Just reorganizing the dressing room as I did this with them, and it was very, very effectful that we did this in advance.
One final thing, going back to the visually impaired athlete, I was afraid of using imagery skill. Because she's blind, and I was afraid to use it. And I used it last minute, and she barked at me like, why didn't you tell me beforehand? Because she was so good at imagery, because everything is her, So sometimes you have to kind of, because of your limit, you don't really even try, but sometimes you go for it, and maybe there will be better way to do it.
You have to ask sometimes, what are you able to see? Because most of the visually impaired athletes actually aren't fully blind. So you ask what they're able to see. But imagery, as you know, is incorporating multiple senses. So they're quite good at imagery. And I think we're out of time. So we'll stick around to answer any of your questions. But thank you so much for attending our panel. We appreciate your time.